everyone, Bible believers around the world. In today's lesson, we are going to be exposing a false doctrine that has circled the Bible community for way too long. And that particular doctrine is the doctrine that states that Yahuwah forbids so-called interracial marriage. Now, this doctrine has its origins, traces its origins back to Ku Klux Klan ideology, because the Ku Klux Klan twisted scriptures in the Bible to try and prove that the Most High Yah hates so-called race mixing, all right? And they did this because of their hatred for the Hebraic nations of people, and they did not want to see their fellow sons and daughters of Yetheth marrying Hebrew men or Hebrew women, all right? They didn't want to see, their dudes with Hebrew wives. They didn't want to see, their daughters, with Hebrew men, all right? So they used the Bible because they understood that the Bible is the highest authority in the world. And if you can twist the Bible to subscribe to your beliefs, you can control the world. And that's exactly what they did. And even decades later, after the Ku Klux Klan has been pretty much just washed away, it's not what it used to be, that it's not what it was during the 20th century. Even after the Ku Klux Klan lost their power on this country and influence around the world, their doctrines still survive. And this is one that has infiltrated even the Israelite community, because the one West divisions of Israelite camps have adopted this Ku Klux Klan ideology and teach the same no race mixing doctrine, all right? Now, this false doctrine is very important to expose for many reasons. The biggest and most important reason, I would say, is because it shows Yahuwah as being somebody who he's not. It paints this false narrative that Yahuwah is this, racial, pure race, 20th century belief holding God, when Yahuwah is not that way. The scripture constantly shows us that Yahuwah's problem is with evil. He's trying to get rid of all evil. That's his thing. He hates whoredom. He hates idolatry. He hates all these evil things. And he loves righteousness. And righteousness is his specialty. That's what he works in. Righteousness. No evil. So people want to try and make this Yah's problem and not the evil that can sometimes come from these relationships, which we're going to see that the scriptures is talking about. That's really what the scriptures is warning about, all right? So it's portraying Yahuwah as, if you're on the Christian side, as a white supremacist, and if you're on the Israelite side, as like Elijah Muhammad, all right, when nothing could be further from the truth. Another reason why we really need to expose this devil doctrine is this is a doctrine that has been used to try and bring down men of Yah, all right, because I've seen this for years, where you'll have a righteous man, you have, a son of Israel who is working righteousness on the earth, has a ministry, he's teaching truth, he's helping the poor people in his community, he's doing everything that Yah commands him to do. But somebody finds out that his wife is a daughter of Yetheth, who we now call white women, and they use that to try and, diminish what he's done and who he is as a man, and try and say, you're not righteous, your wife is white, you wouldn't understand anything, your wife is white, you're evil, you married a white woman. You're a false teacher. You married a white woman. You see, so prejudice Israelites who hold false doctrine will do that. They will try and bring down a righteous man in his ministry because of the ethnicity of his wife, and they don't look into anything else, and they don't even understand what the scripture says, what Torah is actually talking about. All right? And then there's also the problem with this doctrine where it prioritizes phenotype over righteousness. Now, the problem with the stick with your race doctrine anyway is very flawed, because race is fake. It's ethnicity. And it's especially flawed for us Hebrews, or us so-called black people, because when you dig into the scriptures, all the nations that are related to Israel and in the surrounding area have the same phenotype as us. We've exposed this on the channel before. When you dig into the ancient depictions, the Edomites have the same phenotype as us. They're black people. The Moabites have the same phenotype as us. They're black people. Dark skin, thick lips, wide nose bridge, afro, whole 9 yards. Moab, Ammon, Ishmael, whole 9 yards. Same thing. So when you're saying stick with your race because you think that means you're only going to be with the nation of Israel, that's false. The stick with your race doctrine will easily put you with the Edomite, will easily put you with the Moabite, will easily put you with an Ammonite, which will easily put you with an Ishmaelite. And Ham, the sons and daughters of Ham are so-called black too. So the whole black race is a myth, and I'm not letting the sons and daughters of Yefeth off the hook either, no way. Their race is a lie too, because as we've seen on this channel, the Indians are genetic family to the white man of America. But you look at the Indians, and a lot of them are swarthy. You see, skin color don't matter. It's the genetics. Because when you look at the Indian people, their facial features, their body features are Eurocentric, but their skin is dark like ours. So the doctrine of race has tried to place them into something else, when in reality, they're just swarthy Europeans, folks. Same thing with the Latinos. In the Mediterranean Arabs, they're not Shem, they're Yefeth. They're related to the so-called white man too. But for the agenda, they got to, say they're Semitic and they're different. They're not. They're Yefeth. Look at the features, look at the DNA. We'll cover that in the future. All right. And lastly, this is a doctrine that is breaking up righteous relationships and putting babies on the street. Because you can have a righteous Israelite man who's married to a righteous Yephetic woman in the covenant. They have 5 children, and One West shows up, GMS, IUIC, any one of those false teaching groups, and they'd be like, oh, you married the devil. You got to put her away. And your kids are contaminated now. Now those kids are homeless, wife's homeless, everything's ruined. All right? And then you have, a Hebrew woman who's married into an African man. She married an Ethiopian. And they're like, you married a Hamite, you married a dirty African, you need to get rid of him. Now she's homeless. All right? And both of these relationships, according to the Torah, were legal, because they married people who are in the covenant. So let's get started. Okay, we're now going to get into the scriptures and show what the Most High Yah, Yahuwah, is really showing us in the scriptures, and how it completely debunks the KKK/One West no race mixing doctrine. Now, I know that I put under 15 minutes on this chart here because I originally planned to speed run this lesson like I was playing Super Mario Galaxy or something, but I decided to just take my time and let the scriptures speak, all right? Good old slow lesson. So let's get started. The main places that people go who teach that Yahuwah forbids so-called race mixing are Ezra and Nehemiah, Tobit 4:12, Deuteronomy chapter 7, and Jubilees chapter 30. Fact 1. Yahuwah told the Israelites in Deuteronomy chapter 7 not to intermarry with the people of the land because they would turn them away from him and towards their false gods. Notice how Yahuwah's reason for not wanting the Israelites to intermarry with the people of the land was because of their contagious paganism and not racial purity. And this wasn't a one-time thing, because the scripture repeats this again in 1 Kings 11:2, driving the point hard that it was a paganism issue and not a racial issue. And I have an example in my life on why this is so important. Yahuwah always knows what he's talking about. So Yahuwah's warning was that by dealing with these pagan nations, they would turn us away from Yah and his perfect ways unto their false gods and their evil ways. And I have a perfect example of this. So I have a family member who's really into Marvel Comics, superheroes. For the longest time, I couldn't care less about superheroes. All right? I was into Captain America and Iron Man. Didn't care about none of that type of stuff. But spending time with this family member has slowly started to convert me into a Marvel/DC fan. So now I'm looking up stuff about superheroes. Now I care about when the next Batman is coming out. You see? So imagine what happened to me with somebody who's with the pagan. It's the same thing. So just like by being with this family member has slowly started to make me care and be interested in superheroes, you marry a pagan woman and you are not into Buddha and Islam and all that type of stuff. But by year 2, you're praying to Allah. You're buying idols. You see, so who you keep your company with is very important, all right? So just like me living with somebody, a family member who's into superheroes and that slowly, converting me to being interested in superheroes, imagine if it was, if that was, my wife and she was into Buddha or she was into Hinduism. So Yahuwah knows how people can be contagious like that, all right? And this was a contagious paganism issue. Nowhere in Deuteronomy chapter 7 was it said they're a different nation. It's because their blood is different. Their ethnicity is different. They're too black. They're too pale. Their hair is the wrong texture. Their hair is too much of a fro. Their hair is too straight. None of that. It was the contagious paganism. You see, the Ku Klux Klan has to remove the context, because if they read Deuteronomy chapter 7 without cutting it up, people will be like, wait a minute. The reason Yah said don't do it is because they're pagans. So what would happen if the people served Yah like we do? You see, the Ku Klux Klan couldn't have that. So they just removed the context. They just told you no, and didn't tell you why the no was a no. Now, let's go to fact 2. Fact 2. Tobit 4:12 actually is telling the same story about the issue being paganism and not race. Because in this verse, Tobit warns his son to beware of all whoredom before telling him to marry from his father's seed. The word whoredom is key, because one of the meanings of the word whoredom in the Bible is idolatry. And we see this in Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 2, because it says that the Israelites began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, in reference to them worshiping their false gods. So in other words, Tobit made the connection between women of other ethnicities and whoredom. He wasn't trying to keep his nation from getting darker or lighter skinned. See, Tobit was in agreement with Deuteronomy chapter 7. He didn't have some whacked out conspiracy agenda where he didn't want his son marrying somebody who looked different, okay? Just because they look different or they're a different ethnicity. All right, and I'm going to talk about in modern day what Tobit what Tobit and Deuteronomy chapter 7 are warning about, and it's still relevant to today. Women of other ethnicities, and men from other ethnicities, if you're a woman watching this, historically are linked with false idols, demons and idols and whoredom, because using the sons and the daughters of Yefeth, for example, right now, what are things that most Yefetic women like doing? Yoga. Did you know yoga is actually demon worship? Did you know that? A lot of Yefetic women are crazy about yoga, eating unclean. A lot of Yefetic women are crazy about birthdays. If you forget their birthday, they will just completely light you up. That's paganism. Christmas. So it's not the fact that these are what the world calls white women. That's not the problem. The problem is that they come from an evil culture. And if they're not converted, they're illegal to marry. Because just like I gave with the Marvel Batman, Captain America Batman analogy, they'll turn you to evil. They'll convert you to their evil. And this is super easy for us men, because us men, find a cute woman and we just want to do whatever she says, good or bad. So when you're getting married, you need to make sure that that woman is in line with Yah. So when you are doing whatever your wife says because you love her that much, what she's saying is always leading you towards Yah. Because when you have a wicked woman and you're following whatever she does because she's beautiful, she's leading you to hell, the lake of fire. But when you have a Yah-fearing woman, her speech is righteous and her words lead back to the scripture, lead back to the Torah. So you're safe there. But you're not safe with these worldly women of other nations. All right. And the problem is that they're in the world and they're unconverted. And another thing people understand, the reason why Israelite men 99% of the time in the scripture always married their own women was not because they were Elijah Muhammad and they thought other women were inferior. They did it because that was the only safe choice 99% of the time. Because at that time, in the Old Testament specifically, Israel was still under the covenant. Israel was still in Yah's will. So if you were a young man and you needed to find a woman who you knew was righteous, a daughter of Israel was the place to go. Because you knew that if you went to Edom or you went to Moab or you went to Ammon, out of the whole population, there was probably 3 commandment keepers. But if you went to Israel, all of them were commandment keepers. So it wasn't a racial thing. It was the safe option. All right. But now things have changed, because in this captivity, a lot of our women and men have started doing the same things that the other nations do. So now race has never meant less than it does right now, because you can find Israelite women who do yoga just like Yefetic women do. You can find Israelite men, who do the pagan rituals that, the Yefetic men do, or that the Hamitic men do. So now, us as a nation are living just like the other nations. So race has never meant less. So now you can marry an Israelite woman and get into the same trouble that our ancestors would get into for marrying a pagan Canaanite. because we live like Canaanites now. All right? So race has never meant less. Okay? It's never meant less. Fact 3. The Ezra and Nehemiah situation, one was camps love these, but once again, they got to do what the KKK did and rip up the context. Fact 3. The Ezra and Nehemiah situation is once again not a racial issue. And we know this because when Nehemiah was fussing at the Israelites about their strange wives, he reminded them about what happened to King Solomon in Nehemiah 13:26. And when you read about Solomon's downfall, it was his pagan wives who turned his heart away from Yahuwah and towards their false gods. Just like Yahuwah said would happen all the way back in Deuteronomy chapter 7. So Nehemiah was quoting Deuteronomy in regards to what they did. All right? And you need to know about Solomon's downfall to understand why this is relevant. Solomon being mentioned exposes what this whole thing is about. Okay? Now let's get to fact 4, because they have got you beat when they bring up Jubilees chapter 30. But Jubilees chapter 30 actually agrees to everything else you've already read. Fact 4. With proper study, Jubilees chapter 30 at face value appears to support the clan/camp narrative. But once again, just like all the other verses, Jubilees 30 is a paganism problem and not an ethnic problem. For starters, the whole context surrounding chapter 30 is an incident that took place where an Israelite girl was taken and raped by a pagan nation of people. But let's get to the part where it says it's an abomination to marry a Gentile. The scripture makes it clear that when a Gentile keeps Yahuwah's covenant, his view of them completely changes, as seen in Isaiah chapter 56. It's also important to know that these covenant-keeping Gentiles are welcome to live among the Israelites, and the Israelites are commanded to treat them not as outsiders, but as native-born people. We even see in the book of Judith, an Ammonite man be added unto the house of Israel after accepting Yahuwah's ways. I've mentioned this before. We know that covenant-keeping Gentiles, Yahuwah says a lot of stuff, that his house of prayer is a house of prayer for all people, that they can dwell among us, treat them as one that is born in the land. And then the book of Judah literally says, added unto the house of Israel in regards to someone who's not an Israelite. So for you to teach this, you have to believe that someone who's in the house of Israel can't marry in the house of Israel. So they have to marry in the house that's within the house. And what I mean by that is they have to look inside the house of Israel to find someone who's not blood Israel to marry. It makes no sense, because if that's the case, then what y'all is saying is not the case. If that's the case, that would mean what y'all is saying is not true, because they're still being viewed as outsiders anyway. And we know what Yah says is always true. The key is that the Hebrew word used for Gentiles in Jubilees chapter 30 in regard to abomination marriage is a completely different word than the word the Bible uses for converted Gentiles. We can even tie the abomination of Jubilees to the book of Malachi, because the abomination Judah was said to have committed regarding his African wife was marrying the daughter of a strange god. Meanwhile, the scripture didn't mention her ethnicity as the reason for the abomination. The Hebrew word used for Gentile in Jubilees chapter 30 is nekrai, meaning unconverted outsider, not ger, which means converted sojourner. Some even more important things in Jubilees chapter 30 is the fact that the Israelites said they couldn't give their daughter to an uncircumcised people, aka a lawless people. Jubilees also makes the same connection of women of different ethnicities and paganism that Tobit 4:12 does. If the clan narrative were true, it would mean Jubilees contradicts the Bible, as we will soon see. Okay, we are now on page number 2. Fact 5. The law straight up shows that marrying a woman from another nation is not a sin, because Deuteronomy chapter 21 verses 10 through 14 says that if an Israelite man sees a beautiful woman among the captives of their enemies after war, he can take her home, pare her nails, shave her head, and she will become his wife. And if he finds that she does nothing for him, he must let her go free. This is a good explanation for how Solomon got so many wives from different ethnicities. So the scripture literally says it's legal for an Israelite man to take a wife from among the captives of his enemies. All right, their enemies. All right, so for people saying this, the law literally shows it as legal. If it was illegal, this would even be in the law, So this doctrine is falling apart right now. Let's go to fact 6. This is another one that the Most High Yah showed me years ago, which makes this doctrine make zero sense. Fact 6. Leviticus chapter 22 says that if the priest's daughter is married unto a stranger, she can't eat an offering of holy things. If she were only allowed to marry Israelite men in the first place, this law would make zero sense. Exactly. So why would it say that if the priest's daughter is married to a stranger, she can't eat an offering of holy things if she were only allowed to marry Israelite men in the first place. It makes zero sense. And this doctrine makes zero sense because it ain't even true. Let's get to fact 7. So-called mixed marriage was not only used to create the nation of Israel in the first place, but some of the most righteous and important Israelite men either married non-Israelite women, were born from non-Israelite women, or blessed a marriage that had a non-Israelite woman in it. Okay, let's start at the top. Yahuwah used non-Israelite women to build the nation of Israel. So if interracial marriage is sinful, why would Yahuwah use it to build his true nation of people? Ephraim and Manasseh, two of the sons that helped build the 12 tribes of Israel, didn't even have an Israelite mom. Yahuwah doesn't use evil to build things. All right. So you have to believe that Yahuwah used evil to create good. That he used something that he said was a sin to build his chosen nation of people. Makes no sense, and it's really blasphemous. Now let's talk about righteous men who married women of other nations. This is just some that I was able to find. King David did it. Joseph did it. Moses did it. Abraham did it. Boaz did it. Simon did it. And Bathsheba, this is a woman now. Before David, she was married to a Canaanite man. So Bathsheba did it too. So elaborating a bit more on Bathsheba, we know King David was big and a big lover of Yah and was following Yah's truth. So if interracial marriage is a sin, do you think King David would be allowing it to happen in his kingdom? Knowingly? You think so? And it don't end there. Because King Rehoboam, a king of Israel, his mom was not even an Israelite. Ephraim, Egyptian mom. Manasseh, Egyptian mom. King David's grandma was a Moabite. So people like to say in the Ezra and Nehemiah situation where the children got put away, and they say, see, the children, mixed children, they're devils, and they ain't pure, and y'all want to get rid of them. If that were true, why was one of the kings of Israel so-called mixed? Why was King David so-called mixed? 2 kings are rulers. We're not even so-called pure Israelites, which that whole pure race thing's a lie anyway. But it's like, you see, it makes no sense. Now let's talk about, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Sheshan, who was an Israelite dude who gave his daughter to his Egyptian servant for a wife. So this dude had a Hamitic servant and gave his Israelite daughter to his Hamite servant as a wife. You think he knew, you think if the law said that was illegal, he would do it? You see, this doctrine is built off of prejudiceness, and it's built off of fear-mongering, especially from the sons and daughters of Yefeth, because the sons and daughters of Yefeth are hypocrites, brothers and sisters. Obviously not the righteous ones, but the ones in the world are hypocrites, because they teach this because they are so afraid of their skin tone getting darker. But you know what? We've covered this on this channel before. Their ancestors started off so-called black, because the earliest so-called Caucasians, the earliest Caucasian populations were dark-skinned people. That's why we talk about the Indian connection. If you went back in time to like the Tower of Babel, the sons and daughters of Yefeth didn't look like Princess Peach or Mario. They didn't look like Steve Rogers from the Avengers. They looked like Indian people, Eurocentric features and swarthy skin. And in the UK, scientists have proven that. They've brought out the evidence, and there's been an uproar because they can't fathom that they were once dark. All right? So when they're afraid of getting darker, you're afraid of going back to your Tower of Babel condition? And we've talked about how not all of the sons and daughters of Yefeth have the light skin feature. Not all of them developed the light skin mutation because, the Indians, the Pakistanis, and a lot of the Bangladesh are the same genetic ethnic stock as the European Yefeths, but yet they're swarthy. And the Latinos be getting brown too, and they're the same genetic stock too, ethnic stock. So it's like, the white race is a lie because every single Yefethite isn't white. Only the European branch of Yefeth is white, because the other family members who share the same Yefetic history and are genetically tied to the Europeans are brown. All right. So you guys didn't even start off white, and then us Israelites, a lot of us are fearful of that, but Yahuwah is all about protecting righteousness, not color.